I'm Herb. I'm an alcoholic. Hi. Well, welcome to Joshua Tree Community Center. It's wonderful. You are out there. You are out there. Come to Palm Springs and turn left and go to the end of the world. And so I really thank you for this opportunity to share some of my experience with recovery, certainly tonight, and then tomorrow share some information and my experience with Step 11, prayer and meditation. And so we'll have a very full time of it. What I plan on doing tonight, if this is what you're expecting, and quite frankly, even if it's not, so good, you're listening, all right, is to tell you a little bit about where I've come from and what happened and what it's like now, my story, because that'll frame it for tomorrow. I think you'll have a better appreciation of what we'll be talking about tomorrow, and you'll see some of the pieces that fit in and make some sense. After I do that, spending probably about 45 minutes, we'll take a 15 or 20-minute break very casually. There's food, etc., and refreshments over there, and you're welcome to do that while we're meeting here, as long as you don't make too much noise to disrupt it, other people around you. And then we'll get together again because I'd like to give you a bit of an orientation to the detail of what happened to me, the mechanical stuff of what happened to me, because it was transformative. I don't use that word lightly, and you'll get a sense of that as we go forward. After that, we'll have some Q&A again, and maybe if you need to, there's a microphone there, but I don't think that we'll need to do that in the room. It's got some great acoustics, and you're proximate enough. And I really want to be helpful tonight and tomorrow. So I do want to spend time dialoguing with you. It probably wouldn't be as effective to do that during my discussion of my story or the discussion of the transforming process, although we'll kind of see how that goes. And if you really want to ask a question, raise your hand. I'll acknowledge it. And then I'll probably repeat it so that the tape can pick it up and make my comment on that. Please center yourself in the presence of that power that you are seeking, knowing, believing, hoping that in the very seeking of that power, you have found it. And join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I'm a big book fundamentalist. And what that means is that I use the big book as the foundation of my spiritual life, the foundation of my recovery. I read it and I take it literally. When it says to do something, that's what I do. I have found, and you'll hear this throughout the weekend, that the instructions in the big book are very precise and they're very effective. On page 85, it is easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. We are headed for trouble if we do, for alcohol is a subtle foe. We are not cured of alcoholism. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. Every day is a day when we must carry the vision of God's will into all of our activities. How can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. These are thoughts which must go with us constantly. We can exercise our willpower along this line all we wish. It is the proper use of the will. I've said I'm Herb, I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is February 21st, 1984. That means that that's the first day that I did not drink. It wasn't my first day in Alcoholics Anonymous. And in fact, on that day, I did not make a decision to stop drinking, period. On February 20th, 1984, the hospital in which my wife was an inpatient in their alcoholic program was attempting to recover from her alcoholism, and the counselors asked me to stop drinking on February 20th. And I said, sure, no problem. I'm here to support her. You see, I am the White Knight. You'll see the absolute ridiculousness of that statement as we go on. But if in fact there's no other word that you take from tonight or even tomorrow than willingness, then mission accomplished. I was willing to come to support her recovery. I knew she was an alcoholic. I knew she was a drunk. I didn't actually know what an alcoholic was, except she drank too much. Well, you know, it was pretty disgusting. She had to drink every day, and every day she drank, she got drunk. What a lack of personal caring. What a lack of self-esteem. What a lack of willpower. Those were my judgments. Because you see, I did not have to drink every day. And every time I drank, I did not get drunk. Very different story. Some of you may not be able to relate to it. Hopefully some will. Now, I've termed her kind of alcoholism chronic. She had to drink every day, and every time she drank, she got drunk. I termed the kind that I am as periodic. I didn't have to drink every day, and every time I drank, I didn't get drunk. I would very easily have a couple drinks at work, in the bar after work, and come home afterwards as I had promised. I would very easily on the weekend have a drink before dinner and have dinner and not drink for the rest of the evening. I would very easily not drink for a couple days or a couple weeks, depending on what was going on. Very easily. No problem, no decision, no sweat, no stress. But periodically, when I had called her and I told her I'd be home at 7 o'clock, I called her at 8 o'clock saying I wouldn't be home. Or maybe I didn't call her at all. And that night, I drove home, usually in a blackout. And if you're familiar with Los Angeles, I worked downtown and I drove the Harbor Freeway all the way to the South Bay area. It's about 27 miles. And most mornings when I got up, and this was 2 times at least a week, I did not remember driving home. For 20 years, I did that. It didn't bother me because a lot of the people that I drank with had blackouts and we laughed about it. But nothing bad had ever happened by my standards, by my judgment. So when she drank every day and every time she drank she got drunk, it was just disgusting. And finally she took care of her problem. Thank God. On February 10th, she entered the hospital, and it was a wonderful program back in those days. Most programs now are not so supported by insurance, and therefore there's been some cutback on the quality and the care and the intensity of the application of recovery. But in those days, insurance was paying 100% of the bill. The doctors and hospitals were clipping coupons. And so they said, bring the family. You know, you got 3 children, 8, 10, and 12, bring them, you come. We're going to have 3 nights a week. We're going to have a 4-hour session. For the first hour, you, Herb, are going to sit in with the significant others, a group of men and women who were either married to or connected to, in some way, the inpatient alcoholic. I now know that as Al-Anon. I did not know the name, and they didn't give it that name. They just told us we were the significant others. And we had an hour's worth of group therapy. We talked about them and how they affected us. I liked it a lot. Yeah, I liked it a lot. At the same time, my wife was in a group of inpatient people talking about whatever they talk about, and my kids were in a room with other kids from the families that were also in the hospital program, and they like it a lot. Some of you know my children. They're quite engaging, and they get down on it very hard. And so they really had a good time. Then there would be an hour and a half worth of lecture, sort of a learning kind of environment where everybody gathers in a hall. And then for the last hour, we were separated out into maybe 3 families per room. So the inpatient alcoholic, the significant other, and if there were children, the children would be in there like 3 groups of people to talk about the impact of alcoholism on them. 4 hours, 3 nights a week. It was intense, it was fabulous. And on February 20th, the counselor of my significant other group, the Al-Anon group, and I were talking outside of the room after the session, and he said, so Herb, how are you getting along? I said, fine, I'm doing well. He said, you were drinking tonight. I said, well, yeah, I had a couple drinks before I got here with my boss. He said, you probably shouldn't drink while she's in the hospital program and for the 60 days afterwards, for 90 days. Do you have any problem with that? Not a problem. February 20th. You have to hear what happened. I didn't know I had a drinking problem. I didn't know I certainly was an alcoholic. I did not pray to have it removed. All right? I did not make a decision to quit drinking. But that was the last time I ever drank. That was it. On February 21st, 1984, I woke up in a severe depression and a sense of terrible anxiety. And I never had had that. I had never been depressed, and I had never had that kind of anxiety. I was overwhelmed. You see, I believe that my unconscious knew the trigger had been pulled. All right? And so I went to the hospital program that night. I could hardly wait to get there. I did a little group therapy, got the relief. And that night, he said to me, how's it going in the group? I said, well, you know, the guy who's leading it is kind of okay. He's a sort of psychologist, I guess, I said, rolling my eyes. You see, I had a master's degree in psychology. I had trained to be a psychologist. I had done therapy, and I had been in therapy for the prior, 10, 15 years, both individual and group. I had a lot of information and a lot of psychological sophistication. And so I said, you know, I could probably do a better job than that. He laughed. I said, you know, I'm really enjoying the group. I'm really enjoying this group of significant others because I really like the group dynamics, getting down on it, getting into your guts and crying and laughing and raging. And I just love all that stuff. It's rich. And I said, but I don't identify with the people in the room. I identify with the people they're talking about. And he said, we know. You see, they had been watching, they had been listening, and it doesn't take much to sort it out. He didn't say anything other than, we're switching you into the men's inpatient alcoholic group. You'll be the only outpatient. Try that. See how it feels. Willingness. I said, of course I will try that. He wasn't asking my permission. They had already switched me. And in that group, they asked me to write out a first step. Now, it's not our first step, but it's an approximation. They asked me to reflect on and then write about my history with alcohol, both my relationship with people who drank, my father, and my own drinking experience. Well, here I am, 43 years old. I'm a professional in a very wonderful career in insurance consulting, and but my background is quite extensive in self-reflection. At the age of 17, I was standing in front of a judge in Long Beach with my parents standing behind me. I'm 17 years old, and the judge picks up a manila folder and he looks at it, he says, Mr. Kagan, he says, I'm confused. He says, on the left-hand side of this folder, I see that you're the president of your class, you're an A student, you're the captain of the football team, you're the president of the altar boys, and you seem to have a wonderful academic and social record. On the right-hand side, I see that in your freshman year, you were arrested and jailed for drunk and disorderly. In your sophomore year, you were arrested and jailed for drunk and carrying a concealed weapon. And in your junior year, and the reason you're here in front of me, is that you were arrested for grand theft auto, multiple counts. He said, I can't reconcile these two things. Well, I didn't see why he couldn't. It was me. And so if I could have seen from the mountaintop looking down on me, I would have seen that I had lived two lives and that I had a veil between them which never corresponded. That I had somehow not been able to see the incongruities of my life. And that persisted through even the first 5 years of Alcoholics Anonymous. So he goes on, he says, I'm further confused here. He says, there's an application in here for you to go into the seminary to become a Catholic priest. He says, how do you reconcile your behavior with this application? I said, I don't know. I feel called. I have for a long time. And they interviewed me and they accepted me. And he said, the judge, well, I have just sent your running partner in grand theft auto crime to youth authority for 2 years. Hard time, whatever that means. And I would have sent you there, but for this application. Do you intend on going in the seminary? And I said, well, yes, I intend. I'm all packed and ready to go. And he said, well, then you go to the seminary. And I did. And I was the only seminarian that had to call his probationary officer once a month. For a year. But I loved the seminary. A group of men studying to be a priest, getting a wonderful education in a completely isolated environment where we were taken care of as little kings. They cooked for us, they cleaned for us, they did all the manual labor. We didn't have to worry about money. All we had to do was go to class and study and pray and meditate. And 7 years I was there, 17 to 24, 7 years of silence. Silence. We talked after lunch for a half an hour, and after dinner for half an hour, and in the afternoon for an hour's recreation. That was it. We went home once a month. We never went home. We had our parents come in once a month for 2 hours, and we were allowed to go out on a sort of an outing amongst ourselves for a couple hours every Sunday afternoon. But that was it. It was a wonderful life. I thrived in it. I loved it. However, the whole point of that is 7 years, the best instruction, the best environment, silence. Wouldn't you think you'd get spiritual? Wouldn't you think you'd get some information? Wouldn't you think you'd know how to meditate? Well, you'd have to think again, because none of that happened. The reason I left, and that's a long story, but I'll give you the short version, is that one night I went out after 10 o'clock against the rule, and I had a vow of obedience. I had stolen some money from the treasury, and I had a vow of poverty. And I went to a place to drink and find her, and I had a vow of chastity. And the next morning I thought, boy, there is something wrong with this picture. I mean, can you imagine? I did finally see the incongruity, and I left. Then when I couldn't be a priest, I decided to become a psychologist, because if I can't save your soul, I will at least help you get mental health. Yes, thank you very much. Well, after 6 years of that effort, in, as I mentioned, getting a graduate education and doing therapy and getting therapy, I found myself drinking 2 straight-up martinis before I would go to the free clinic to do therapy. Well, you had to get loose, you know. You had to kind of get in touch with yourself. And that's, yeah. Anyway, I didn't do anything to embarrass too many people. And, but wouldn't you think that with that kind of background in education, getting therapy, giving therapy, and all the education that went with it, that I would have had some insight to who I am and to how I operate and to see the incongruities of my life. And I didn't. And I didn't. So I did all the self-help stuff of the 60s and 70s and 80s, including EST training, Life Springs, yoga, hypnosis, transcendental meditation, relaxation response. If it promised help, I read it. If it promised peace, I went to the workshop or a retreat or men's groups or whatever else there was. I am a very, very sincere seeker. I was just so lost, and I wasn't connecting with anything. So they asked me in this hospital program, to get back to that, to write out my relationship with alcohol. And you know, within 20 minutes, I began seeing it. I wrote about my father and his drunken behavior, and my anger and my resentment about all of that. But then I started writing about my experiences, my own personal experiences with alcohol at age 13. Drinking a quart of whiskey and a 6-pack of beer with a good friend of mine on a Friday night, getting very, very, very drunk, knee-buckling drunk, having just a wonderful time, but blacking out, passing out, and waking up the next morning covered in my own vomit, 13 years old. And it was the first time I'd ever reflected on that, and I was writing, and then I remembered during the high school period many times drinking way too much, knee-buckling, blacking out, and throwing up. And I sat back after 20 minutes of writing. I'm 43 years old with all this introspective education and opportunity, being stunned, not by the fact that I had a drinking problem. My father was a drunk. My wife's father and mother were both drunks. I was surrounded with alcohol and alcoholics, although I didn't know the names at that time. I just knew everybody drank too much, including my wife. And so I wasn't stunned or startled at having a drinking problem. What stunned me was that I had not seen it. I was completely clueless. It wasn't that I had seen a drinking problem and decided to not look at it. No, that wasn't it. It wasn't that somebody had asked me about my drinking problem or told me to cut back on my drinking or to change my drinking. Nobody had ever said anything to me, despite the fact I had 2 502s in consecutive years, 1968 and 1969. I just thought I was lucky the first time that they took me off the road because I really was drunk. And the second time I just thought they made a mistake because I was just really tired. But I never connected the dots. I really have experienced what the Big Book talks about in terms of the mental obsession, the mental defectiveness, living in that strange mental blank spot they talk about. But I did not know that then. So I said to this counselor that was leading the group, when I read it, about 20 minutes worth of reading, I said, I think I have a drinking problem. Notice, I didn't go all the way and say I'm an alcoholic. I didn't know what that meant. I said, I think I have a drinking problem. And they said, why don't you try a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous? So I was willing to go. Hear that theme again. I was willing to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went up to a meeting that was right near my house, a men's stag meeting. It's on Wednesday night. I still go there. It was my very first meeting, and I make it when I'm in town every Wednesday night. But they sit around in a circle. There's probably 50, 60 guys in there. And I'm a very quick study. Children of alcoholics size up a room pretty quickly and know how to operate. Where is it safe to be? How do you react? What's expected? So I registered all of that. And so they went around. I'm Sam, I'm an alcoholic. I'm Joe, I'm an alcoholic. I'm Bill, I'm an alcoholic. And I raised my hand. I'm Herb, exploring being an alcoholic. Well, that's what I was doing. I knew I had a drinking problem. I was exploring it. Well, I came back to that group 3 different Wednesdays, and by the end of the time, the hospital program and all that was going on there that I described, and then the meetings, and I was listening to the sharing that was going on there, I finally copped to it and said, I'm an alcoholic. And as soon as I did that, the meeting said, get a sponsor. And I called this friend of mine, Lloyd, who is my sponsor. He lives in St. Louis today, but he used to live in Manhattan Beach. And he and I were running buddies in our drinking days. He was 6'5" and 280 pounds, just like my father. But he was fun when he drank. And I taught him how to ride motorcycles, and we had a good time drinking and riding, and it was just great. But one day on January 1st, 1973, he woke up in Pasadena jail after leaving my house. And he decided to go to AA and has been sober ever since. So in 1984, 11 years later, when I'm thinking that I have a problem and I need to get a sponsor, I'm going to call him. Irish Catholic, running buddy, drank like I did, same business as I do. And I said, Lloyd, I think I have a drinking problem and I'd like you to be my sponsor. And he said, well, let's talk about that. He did not say, we've been waiting for you. He did not say, it's about time, dummy. He didn't say any of the stuff you hear in meetings. He was very kind and very welcoming, like the meeting was when they laughed just like you did. Just a gentle laugh, but a welcoming laugh when I said exploring being an alcoholic. And he said, I'm willing to do that under one condition. I said, what's that? He said that you call me every day. I said, why would I do that? And he said, because you'll have to find a new sponsor. I'll fire you if you don't. I go, oh, okay, well, I don't want to do that, so I'll call you every day. Well, now, I'm a guy who is fairly intelligent and reasonably well educated, and I read English. I don't need to ask your help. I never ask your help. I don't want anybody looking over my shoulder holding me accountable. I'm a loner. I do it yourselfer. Thank you. I don't ask for help. So I said, well, what will we talk about? And he said, I want you to tell me what you're thinking, feeling, and doing. Your thinking is demented with 20 years of drinking. You have no feelings because of the 20 years of drinking. They're anesthetized. And he said, oh, by the way, your feelings will return as you thaw out. Your feelings will return, and that's generally not good news. All right? And you'll tell me what you're doing because your behavior comes from demented thinking and anesthetized feelings. He said, you're a train wreck, affecting all those around you, and you don't know that you don't know, and you can't see that you can't see. So you, for the very first time in your life, will attempt to be transparent. I had no idea what he was talking about. Later on, when we had a discussion about that, he said, I want your insides and your outsides to match. I still really didn't know what he was talking about because I didn't know that I didn't know, and I couldn't see that I couldn't see. And so we began the journey. He said, get a book, this big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and read it and work the steps. Great advice. 2 out of 3 are outstanding advice. The last one assumed that, in fact, I could figure out how to work the steps. What he did was pass on to me what had been passed on to him, and that is work the steps. Well, I'm in AA at this point. That's step 1. I'm a trained theologian, he said in his mind. I had 1 course in theology. But, I was in the seminary, so I have this delusion about myself. And I'm a cradle Catholic from birth through grammar school, high school, college, and postgraduate work, all in Catholic environments. Steps 2 and 3, blew by it, didn't need them. Well, I read chapter 4, it was a bit naive. And so then I said, okay, I'll do this 4th step. And I got the big book and I read it and I couldn't figure it out. And I got the 12 and 12, and it's a wonderful commentary, but there are no directions in it. And then I got the Hazelton literature and the literature from the hospital and the literature from the meetings, and I laid it all out on my desk. I was going to do the mother of all 4th steps, and I did nothing. So I called him and I said, I don't know how to start. And he said, write an autobiography. In the chapter describing the 5th step, it says we tell someone all, and that all, A-L-L, is in italics, our life story. So quite frankly, I think that advice is pretty decent. Write an autobiography. As long as there's maybe another couple directions about looking for motives and belief systems and values and the underlying causes and conditions. Those are the words that are used in the big book when they give the precise directions as to how to do your 4-step inventory. But I didn't get that. He said, write an autobiography. So what I did was I wrote a script of my behavior. See, all my behavior. I did this, I went there, I shouldn't have, it was bad, I have a lot of guilt, I have a lot of shame, I hurt this person a little bit, no, just trying to. And then, and so I wrote all of that out, I wrote all of that out as best I could, sort of the therapeutic model, sort of, because that's where I had come from, in my own training. And then I read it to him. It took about 3 hours, and at the very end, I had some kind of sense that, gosh, I may be just a little bit selfish and insensitive. That was it. So then he said, do the 6th and 7th step and do the 8th and 9th step, and I did. And I went around saying, gosh, I'm really sorry. Gosh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm just so sorry. As a result of that sorry 9th step, no spiritual awakening. Nothing happened. I was 4 years sober, 1984 to 1988, and I was still behaving like when I was drinking. You heard about the sober horse thief. The sober horse thief steals really bad horses and gets caught a lot. But when he sobers up, he steals much better horses. And he doesn't get caught half as much. Well, that was my story. All right? I cleaned up really well, but I was still operating on only one principle: immediate gratification of my every desire. All right? Instant gratification was the only principle. And people didn't matter in my life. People were furniture in my life, and I moved them about so that I would be comfortable, and I threw them out if, in fact, they were of no use to me any longer. I'm not proud of that. I am describing it. I'm talking about 4 years sober. All right? Now, I thought that I was in the program. I was going to a meeting every day. And when I got in trouble at work, which was a lot in those days, because I was arrogant, I was insensitive, I was delusional about who I was and who they were. I did not know that then. And I could not see that then. And if you had pointed it out, I would have argued with you. I mean, my God, I'm a Renaissance man, don't you know? I mean, I have been trained in philosophy and theology and psychology. All right? And all these I've gone to EST training. All right? I'm really in touch. And by the way, I'm 4 years sober, don't you know? And and what I know now is that I was not a Renaissance man. I was a Neanderthal. Yeah. I had, with all that background and all that information and all that experience, I had a big club. And I used it to impress you or to intimidate you. And those were my styles, so that I would get what I wanted. 4 years sober. And at 4 years, I met a man who spoke in a meeting a couple times, just for 5 minutes, two weeks in a row. And he said something that must have attracted me. And I just liked the way he walked. It's just so upright. I liked the way he looked in his eyes. There was a clarity and a brightness. But most especially, I liked when he talked. There was a tone. There was an energy. There was a vibration in his voice that just resonated with me. And I had made up my mind, here's Grace, that I would rework the steps in light of my upcoming 5th year. This was on February 23rd, right after my 4th year. I said I'm going to do my steps again, thinking that I had already done them, but this time I'm going to work them with a different person. Notice I didn't say I'm going to get a new sponsor. I didn't say that. I like my sponsor. He will be my sponsor as long as he and I are sober and alive. But I wanted a new experience. I don't think I was this clear about it, but I just knew intuitively. And there was an invitation of grace. To do the steps again was not being talked about in the meetings that I was going to. Or maybe it was, and I just didn't hear it, but these little seeds get planted. One of the reasons we go to meetings is that there are things that are said that we absorb that we don't even know we absorb. And later on, when the conditions are right, that seed bursts and something happens. Some growth happens. And but to pick a man other than my sponsor was a real clear grace. And I asked him if he would help me with the steps. And I did not know that he was one of the people that I've come to really admire, and those are people who are really big book fundamentalists. They understand the big book, but mostly they have applied it precisely to their own lives, and they have worked each step as it's described in the big book. And they've had a spiritual awakening as the result of those steps. That's the 12th step promise, isn't it? Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. I'm quoting, I'm not paraphrasing. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. That's the promise. Now, I did not know any of that then. I just wanted to work the steps again. And I think it was a good thing that I didn't have any information about it or any sophistication about it. Because I was willing, once again, to do what I was told. I was willing to take direction. And he gave me directions on each step. Starting with step 1. In fact, he gave me 3 different directions on step 1. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. A direction with regard to the defect of my body. A direction with regard to defect of my mind. And an assignment with regard to the defect of my will, my spirit. And those were readings assignments from the big book. I was to use a highlighter. And once I had finished reading and praying and reflecting on that, I was to make an appointment with him and to get back and to go over that material. And I did. And that's what happened to me. I did one step at a time over an 11th-month period. I began in February 1988. And I did the precise work out of the big book with the direction of this man through the 9th step, which I finished in December of 1988, 11 months. And in January, I became aware that I had been changed. That I was no longer restless, irritable, and discontent. That I had a sense of peace and ease and comfort that I had never known. Now, I now know that it's a good thing I didn't know what was happening when it was happening. See, my definition of a spiritual awakening comes right out of Appendix 2 from the back of the big book, where it says, essentially, that it's a change. A spiritual awakening is a change of personality, a change in us, a change in the way we think, a change in the way we feel, a change in the way we behave. And here's the difference between that and self-help. And it's done to us, not by us. We submit to a process, and it's done to us, not by us. I know today, looking back over my shoulder, or at least I suspect, that if I had been aware of what was happening in that 4th step, when the 4th column of the resentment inventory asks me what my role, what my responsibility, where am I to blame, and I began to see I am not a victim of my father relationship, or of a poor choice of marriage, or of being underpaid by all my employers. I am not a victim at all. That in fact I'm a perpetrator. That I am in fact the co-creator of my life in every respect, without exception. I am 100% responsible for my thoughts, my perceptions, my feelings, my reactions, and my actions. 100% no mitigation. Oh, I was 48 years old having this experience of growing up for the very first time, taking responsibility for my life. But if I had had a sense during the time I was doing that of what was going on, if I had had any sort of self-reflection and awareness, I clearly would have taken credit for it. So it was wonderful that the process was blind to me, that I merely submitted to the process and I was taken through the process, and it was only after it was completed, finished with all of my 9th step amends by the end of December, finished all of my 9th step amends, that I became aware that I had been changed. And the change has in fact persisted since then, because as the paragraph that I read from page 85 suggested, we have a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. I have a daily reprieve, so I have a daily effort. And my mental image of this is that I stay gently pressed up against it. I stay gently pressed up against this program, gently pressed up against this process, gently pressed up against the Spirit, all right? Whereas in the old days, I would attack it with a vengeance with my club and I would wrestle it to the ground, very aggressive. Now I just lean into it. Just lean into it. And I allow that Spirit that I know is there, that I've made a decision of faith that's there. I allow that Spirit. I ask that Spirit to take me forward, to move me forward. And about every 3 or 4 years, I engage a new step guide to go through the step work, beginning with step 1. Sometimes I have a very profound experience and sometimes I don't. It doesn't matter to me. It's just my rhythm. Some people do it every year, some people only do it once. I have no opinion on that. I just have experience. My experience is that the Spirit seems to have invited me about every 3-4 years to engage another person to go through this work. And I know that it's broadened and deepened my spiritual awakening. Because today, in contrast to yesterday when I didn't see that I didn't see, and I didn't know that I didn't know, I began to know that I didn't know. And today I know that I know. I'm still very convinced that there are shadows. There are still blank spots. That today, standing here, there are still motives and beliefs driving my behavior that I'm clueless of. But I'm okay with that. I sit in the presence of power every morning, absorbing that power, asking for guidance, being absorbed by that power, taking direction. And that's prayer and meditation, and that's what we'll be talking about tomorrow. And it has changed my life. My life today flourishes. I've had a career of 42 years, which I retired from in November. My wife retired also. We have 6 grandchildren under 6. Very busy. 3 different adult children, having 2 apiece. And 2 of our adult children are in program. 1's 16 years in Al-Anon, 1's 16 years in AA. Each of them, Big Book fundamentalists, each of them has worked the steps out of the Big Book with their respective sponsors or step guide. Each of them has a kick-ass program. These are very wonderful, mature, spiritual, balanced, and fun women whose personal mission in life is to humble me. They have taken it on and they do it with righteousness. That's right. All right, my wife is 22 years sober. She relapsed after 11 months because she was doing her first sobriety for the kids. And after she came back after 2 weeks, December 31st, 1984, who gets sober on New Year's Eve? Yeah, that's right. When you're done, you're done. When you're done, you're done. She didn't know it was New Year's Eve. She was just done. And she has 22 years of wonderful sobriety, and we're friends today. We'll talk a little bit maybe about that tomorrow. We're friends today. Wonderful, wonderful. People talk about perhaps retirement being difficult because you're both home now. Oh man, it's wonderful. You know, we each have our own program and we each have our own space, but we love being together, having a meal together or having a conversation together and then going our separate ways, and we're in collaboration, and we have a wonderful sense of communication most of the time. She needs to turn her burner up on her program, but other than that, right. And as soon as I start talking like that, they're going to send me to Al-Anon. So, and then and just a little bit more about what it's like now. I was invited to teach 12-step spirituality at Loyola Marymount College. I do probably 4 workshops every semester there for their KDAC people and other people, and that's wonderful. But as a result of that, now here's the irony. You recall that I was in the seminary? You recall that I left in 1964. Well, in 2004, the seminary called me and they said, would you please come and teach 12-step spirituality to our baby priests, to the guys who are going to be ordained a year from now. They need to know from a pastoral reason what 12-step recovery is all about. Would you come and give us a full semester, 2-unit course on 12-step spirituality? And I do that once a year. Have for the last 3 years. I've been invited back to the seminary I left literally in disgrace. You can't get here from there. You can't get here from there. And yet, this program, which is simple but not easy, it says on page 14. Simple but not easy. It says a price has to be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness. We must turn in all things to the Father of light, who presides over us all. Tomorrow we're going to spend an entire day talking about that turning. That sitting in the presence of light. That sitting in the presence of the Spirit of the universe. That sitting in prayer and meditation. It's not only formative, it is transformative. And I look forward to that. Thank you.